6.0 is almost here, and so is the first half character Lauma, who is going to be bringing a bunch of new things, including a new reaction called Lunar Bloom. It also does affect reactions like Virgin as well, and she does shake up the meta for Dendro units quite a bit. Today I'm here with a should you or should you not pull for the upcoming character Lauma. So it aims to cover points of her kit that does make her really strong. I'm not going to be going over exactly everything because there's a lot of stuff and that's best saved for something else. But I will be going over the details on why she makes these key teams really good. Some strengths of hers, which is going to be mainly a repeat because there's a lot to talk about. And also downsides where there's really only one downside to her. And technically it cannot even be viewed as a downside if you look at it in certain ways. So really good character. Reasons why you should and should not summon. So first talking about Lauma herself. So what makes her really good? Lauma is centralized in primarily her teams of Bloom teams, so Bloom, Hyper Bloom, so on. Also does apply to Quick Bloom teams. Virgin is also some setups you can't do, but that's the less common one. It's mainly Bloom, Hyper Bloom, and also something like Quick Bloom. Kicking it off, she does actually have Elemental Red Shred, which is also really strong. And it's also for two elements that are impacted the most, which is great for these teams, being Dendro and Hydra. Both Dendro and Hydra Res get a 25% shred on enemies for hitting them with Lauma's skill, which is extremely strong. So if you're running her on a regular Bloom team, a Nilu Bloom team, a Quick Bloom team, all those is going to be great. So you're going to be making Lauma do more damage, the people with Hydro, their hits more damage, and also the Bloom itself to do more damage, as you're getting a big 25% elemental shred. One of her best 4-piece artifact sets is also Deepwood. That gives you 55% Dendro Red Shred, which is insane. So again, on Bloom teams themselves is going to be making Lauma, the Blooms, do more damage. Mainly focusing on the Dendro side of things because again, 55% Shred is insane. 25% from her base kit and also 30% from Deepwood. If you're running a Quick Bloom, a Hytham team for example, a Hytham is going to do a lot more damage as well because that Shred is insane. If you're running some setup of Bloom with Lauma plus Nahida, both of them are going to do a lot more damage as well. So a lot of characters are getting benefited from the Hydro Red Shred and also the Dendro Red Shred especially. And then the main thing, the lunar reaction she does have. So whenever someone does trigger a Bloom related reaction on her team, she will convert it to Lunar Bloom reaction, which will increase the base damage of the Lunar Bloom based off her elemental mastery by a total of 0.0175% up to a maximum of 14%. So just a big free damage increase to that Bloom based off Lauma's own elemental mastery. What's even more crazy is she allows these reactions, again, Bloom, Hyper Bloom, and Virgin damage dealt, to be able to crit now. When she does use her skill, she gains a buff based off the party level's moon sign. If you don't know what moon sign is, it's really just depending on how many Not Cry characters are on her team. So her plus another one gives you Ascendant Gleam. If it's just her, it's Nascent Gleam. Both of them are great. Nascent Gleam will make those reactions be able to score crit hits now at 15% crit rate and 100% crit damage. And the crit rate effect can stack from similar effects. With Ascendant Gleam, all the party's Lunar Bloom damage will have also 10% crit rate and 20% crit damage. So she is able to make your Blooms crit. They already do a lot of damage before, now she's able to further amplify it thanks to converting it to Lunar Bloom, and now she is able to make them crit. To top it all off, her ultimate also has a thing called Pale Hymn, where using her ultimate will give her 18 stacks of it. You can consume a stack and it will increase the damage dealt based off her own elemental mastery. And if you hit multiple enemies, you can consume multiple stacks. The damage increase for Bloom, Hyper Bloom, and Virgin is upwards to 500% elemental mastery. Lunar Bloom damage increase to 400% of elemental mastery and can last for 15 seconds, which is just absolutely insane. The damage dealt increase you get is absurd. Everything she brings to these Bloom related teams and primarily Dendro related teams is just insanely strong. So I honestly covered enough of what makes her strong by already going over that. I'm now just going to list the one downside she does have, which again, as I mentioned, can also not even be looked as a downside depending on you, which is depending on what you want to do, her build can be a bit difficult to get. You want to stack her with as much EM as possible, so running EM, and you also on top of that want to get good amount of energy recharge. And for the best results at the same time, you want to have a relatively good amount of crit. Crit isn't really like necessary, but it is really nice to have if you can get like around like a 60 to 50% crit ratio. Problem is often that's going to sacrifice your actual circlet and make you run a crit rate circlet instead. But again, I'm only saying this as like a potential downside is if you want to get the best results. best results would be getting really high EM and ER rolls, and then having the EM stats, because you don't need to run Dendro bonus because it's kind of useless. And then the crit circlet helping out a lot, so balancing a good crit ratio while having a lot of EM and also a good chunk of ER. That can be extremely difficult. But as I mentioned, you could also potentially just view that as a whatever thing. Like, you don't have to build crit. It's not a necessary thing to increase her own personal damage by much. You can very much just forego EM, and then on the flower and feather, focus on EM, ER, and then on the other pieces, just focus on ER. But if you really want to min-max that, it can be quite difficult as you have a bunch of stats to focus on. Depending on the weapon you use, you can also practically fix her actual energy requirements, since there are good 4-star ones with energy requirements that could help, such as Fruit of Fulfillment, which helps a ton with the actual ER requirement. So again, there's many workarounds to getting the build you want. So you can ideally look at it. If you want to min-max, it's probably going to be really difficult. If you want to get, like, you know, the best as you can, it's going to be difficult. But if you don't care, you can really just slap EM, and try to get as much ER as you can. If you're running an ER weapon, that makes it that much easier. So in one way, it can be extremely difficult to build her, which can be viewed as a downside. And in the other case, it could be whatever. So again, that's what I'm saying. There's not really like an actual downside. And now bringing into the reasons why you should or should not summon. Reasons why you should summon is extremely simple. If you're an avid user of Bloom related teams, so Hyper Bloom team setups, if you use any of those, Lauma is a massive upgrade, ideally replacing Nahida on practically all of them, and or also Nilou Bloom. Those are the two teams she is going to function insanely well on, and is where you see the best results from Lauma. If you run Hyper Bloom teams still, and or you do use Nilou Bloom teams, or you want to bring it back just because, you know, maybe yours doesn't do as well anymore because of all the stuff that's been happening to Bloom, and Dendro itself where it hasn't really received that many changes, you very much will want Lauma. She's going to beef up those teams and make it some of the best teams once again. It is insane how strong Lauma is. And same thing does apply to Quick Bloom teams, such as Quick Bloom Alhaitham teams. That team receives a massive upgrade and makes it his best team again. Alhaitham, Lauma herself, usually Shinobu for the Electro slot, and the last slot being Xingqiu, Yelan, and so on. Those teams are going to be his new best teams. Any other Quick Bloom DPS, like if you're using Tignari Quick Bloom, that's going to be his best team with Lauma as well. Any Quick Bloom DPS is really going to want her as well. Especially these Dendro DPS mains, again, Tignari, Alhaitham, because you get up to a 55% Dendro Red Shred. Quick Bloom, the big thing was, oh, the blooms actually help a lot with the damage, so you sacrifice a little more personal damage since you're not doing spread or aggravate or whatever. And the blooms help, but the fact that she does give you up to a 55% Dendro Red Shred when you are running Deepwood on her, that's going to significantly impact the damage that Alhaitham and Tignari do. If you also run Sino also receives a big benefit from her, as you are able to run a Quick Bloom Sino, where you run Sino as the one, you know, that can proc it. You can run Nahida as well, or a different Dendro, whatever you want, Lauma, and then your Hydro slot. There's a lot of setups you can do with that. Sino becomes a lot stronger with Lauma as well. Realistically, any Quick Bloom team with any other DPS you want to do, like Chlorine Quick Bloom, again, Sino Quick Bloom, all these characters receive a big buff from Lauma. So if you primarily use these units, she is going to be a big consideration for you to pick up, as she's going to majorly make them stronger. Chlorine is a less so priority just because you also have Overload Chlorine, which is also just insanely strong. So for her, ideally, you don't want to only pull her, unless you are just a massive Chlorine fan, but you mainly want to have multiple teams that benefit from Lauma. If it's just Chlorine, you practically just want to stick to Overload. Again, really any Dendro-related Bloom team is a big benefit from Lauma, and you really want to consider her, especially if you do main those kind of teams. And reasons why you shouldn't summon are practically very obvious. If you do not realistically use Dendro that much, you don't really use Bloom teams. Let's say you're an Advent Malvika team enjoyer, and your other main team is something like the Skirk team, or also the Nouvellette team. Pretty much you just have a bunch of teams outside of Dendro where you don't really use Dendro much anymore. So again, primarily using Malvika team, the Skirk team, Arlecchino at the same time, Chlorine, Overload. This game has so much team variety now, so you don't ideally have to use Dendro, and you aren't needing to be forced to it either. So there is a lot of players, especially players that I have met, that really don't bother with Dendro much. As strong as Dendro teams are, you don't need to have them. So if you are someone that doesn't really use Dendro, you don't really care, you don't really want to get into it, but maybe you're kind of interested, but let's say you also don't really use the DPSs and you already have setups for the DPSs that I mentioned, again, mainly to someone like Chlorine, because you can just stick her on the Overload team as usual. In those cases, you wouldn't really need to pull Llama because you're not going to realistically use her that much. And if you only really have maybe one team that benefits a ton from Llama, then maybe you can also consider skipping there because it's just one team. Llama brings a bunch of buffs to multiple teams across Dendro-related teams, so just focusing on one might not be the greatest idea, especially if you're a light spender / free-to-play. So in one team or less, or you just don't use Dendro at all, those are practically the only reasons why you'd want to skip. And that does bring the video to a close, going over her kit and why she is so strong. Talking about the one potential downside, which again, really isn't a downside if you think about it. Reasons why you should summon, mainly just talking about how much she does buff to these Ender teams, and reasons why you shouldn't summon, which is really just if you don't end up wanting to run Bloom teams, or you don't use Dendro like that in general. I do hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, drop a like, would be greatly appreciated. If you're new to the channel or haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and turn the bell icon for future videos like this, along with all the types of Genshin Impact content, and I'll see you later. Peace out.